back to That's Cringe, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't know what Katy Perry was talking about when she said the taste of her cherry chapstick. That shit don't got no flavor to it. Not that I eat chapstick, but... If you're a returning bestie of mine, well, that's a little redundant. If you are a returning subscriber, you're a bestie. If you're new here, you're an acquaintance I avoid eye contact with when I see you out in public. Don't wave at me.
I don't know you.
But if you're one of my besties, you're no stranger to the concept of cringe. I subject you to a lot of spine-tingling, gag reflex stroking topics here on our channel. And I aim to push the boundaries on just how much you're willing to take, like I'm the creators of Riverdale and you are the brain-rotted audience wondering how the fuck one goes from such cinematic gold like Sweet Life of Zack and Cody to discussing gargoyle kings and alien life forms decaying in maple syrup. Where was I going with this? I am the cringe mistress. And even that is not the worst thing I've ever said. For those of you unfamiliar with the word, you may be asking, what is cringe? What is that disgusting feeling I get when I see something embarrassing? That secondhand humiliation that clouds my vision. It leads me down a rapid spiral of uncertainty. Well, the word has Germanic roots and can be traced back to the Old English word cringen, according to vocabulary.com, which means to give way, fall in battle, or become bent. The adjective form, cringing, has only recently gained popularity in the past decade, but the word cringe itself can be traced back all the way to the 13th century. According to Merriam-Webster, to cringe is to recoil in distaste, to shrink in fear or servility, or to draw in or contract one's muscles involuntarily, as from cold or pain. The outside influences that cause such reactions vary from person to person. For example, the Urban Dictionary definition of cringe is just Jake Paul. And if you were like me and needed it used in a sentence to really understand the scope of the word, they provide a very helpful one. Jake Paul is cringe. The second most popular definition is, quote, when someone acts or is so embarrassing or awkward, it makes you feel extremely ashamed and or embarrassed, end quote. So cringe is oftentimes a physical or mental reaction to something embarrassing, awkward, or humiliating that is so bad that you can't stand to be close to it. You have to shrink away or put distance between you and said monstrosity by closing your eyes, raising your shoulders, or simply looking away from the train wreck. And as unpleasant as this feeling is, it still became somewhat of a staple in pop culture, to the point where entire cringe compilations can be found on the internet, and shows dedicated to cringe humor still dominate our televisions and streaming sites. In the early 2000s, cringe comedy was on the rise, exemplified by shows like Curb Your Enthusiasm, the original The Office, which was based in the UK, and Borat, a highly controversial mockumentary starring Sacha Baron Cohen as a fictional journalist from Kazakhstan. This genre of comedy is defined by its socially awkward or embarrassing characters having to sit through humiliating situations, while the audience itself watches in growing shame. As Alena Saucke, author of So Funny It Hurts, Cringe Comedy and Performances of Discomfort, states, cringe comedy can be defined as the embodied experience of third-party social discomfort, from the viewer's perspective, but also as a part of the performance. The discomfort is often caused by the protagonist's failure to communicate or fully inhabit their desired self-image, an incongruence that is clearly apparent to the viewer, and often to other characters within the show. It goes beyond the German Schadenfreude, as rather than delighting in the misfortune of others, cringe viewers are trapped within the character's dilemma with them, end quote. See, that word that Saucke mentions, the German word Schadenfreude, is important here. It's a combination of the German word Schaden, which means harm or damage, and Freude, which means joy or pleasure. In short, it means the joyful feeling we get when we witness someone else fail at something or do something painful painfully embarrassing. And it's important because it helps us fill in the blank of cringiness before the advent of the internet, which becomes its own Goliath in need of slaying later. According to the Google Ngram viewer, the term schadenfreude began picking up at the very tail end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. The word began hitting its highest peaks in the last 6 or so years in American English, but has been fluctuating in use in British English. It was coined in 1853 by Richard Chenevix Trench, who, quote, mentioned it in his best-selling book on philology, on the study of words. For Trench, the mere existence of the word schadenfreude was unholy and fearful, a mournful record of the strange wickedness which the genius of man, so fertile in evil, has invented, end quote. But schadenfreude is not the only phrase that embodies this conflicting feeling of joy and harm. As Tiffany Watt Smith puts it, the Japanese have a saying, the misfortunes of others taste like honey. The French speak of joie maligne, a diabolical delight in other people's suffering. The Danish talk of skyfu, and the Dutch of leedvermaak. To see others suffer does one good, wrote the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. To make others suffer even more so. This is a hard saying, but a mighty human, all too human principle. End quote. As you may have noticed, Smith doesn't mention an English word for the feeling we get when we see others fail. And it's not because us silly Americans suck so much at language that we can't invent our own word for such a common phenomenon. We do suck at language though. Have you ever heard me try to pronounce any word ever on this channel? It's like watching someone make beef Wellington out of a bunch of letters before they put it in a blender and slap it on a pink-tinted, red-haired plate. But the reason there isn't a direct translation of such words like schadenfreude or joie maligne is because we as Americans somehow think we're too superior to have such experiences. We don't laugh when our friends fall down, we just make them fall down and then blame them for their demise. Tiffany Watt goes on to say that there has never really been a word for these grubby delights in English. In the 1500s, someone attempted to introduce epicuricacy from the ancient Greek, but it didn't catch on. Even as English authors and literary pieces spoke of such feelings, describing them, as Thomas Hobbes did, as obscure feelings which want names, there never came about such a word for such phenomenon. In 1926, a journalist in The Spectator asserted that there is no English word for schadenfreude because there is no such feeling here. There are many things I myself can say about that, but I will just quote Smith, who profoundly says, he was wrong. Of course. And that he was, severely. Because as I stated earlier, though the word cringe has been floating around our little language bubble since the 13th century, its far more descriptive form, cringing, has only become popular in the last decade or so. This distinction to me is important because these two forms of the same word have very different historical context. The term cringing, as Alena Saucke explains, saw an increase of interest in the past decade, that being between the early to mid 2000s and 2015, based on her thesis date. The word cringe, however, was born out of the 1200s, which was, what did they do in the 1200s? Thrice eat berries and die? The point is, one word was born out of internet culture and the other berries and death, and like 43 Crusades. In our gilded day and age, we don't really connect the term cringe to its old English definition of falling in battle. Instead, it has become nearly synonymous with what I like to call the rise of cringe comedy in the 2000s began to shape a new form of humor that we previously shied away from. Though for the longest of time, we didn't have a direct English translation for the schadenfreude phenomenon, we did in fact like seeing others put in strange and uncomfortable situations, especially if those situations allowed us to laugh at them to prove our own superiority. But shows like America's Funniest Home Videos that mainly showed people falling or being humiliated in one quirky way or another, The Office that featured awkward scenes and painful eye contact moments with the audience, all fell away to the glorious and mean-spirited spirited category known as Cringe Compilations on social media. The compilations, usually featuring videos from TikTok, poke fun at the perceived silly antics of people who are just having a good time on the internet. For my perusement of cringe compilations, the targeted people are usually older, conventionally unattractive, people with disabilities, people who are neurodivergent or perceived to be neurodivergent, people who have perceived unconventional interests like anime, or people who are plus sized. And you can't forget about the teenage girl demographic because what is pop culture if not making fun of everything young girls do? These compilations are a smaller part of the larger machine known as cringe culture, a phenomenon Caleb Clark refers to as the unsubtle boogeyman of the online world. Cringe culture is the overarching umbrella housing communities like cringe compilations and subreddits like Cringe and Cringe Pics, where, according to Avni Sridhar, people congregate to, quote, share other people's cringy content to make fun of it en masse. The cringe subreddits are definitely a community to behold, especially the ones that think they're superior and less cringe than everyone else on the internet, while simultaneously using stale phrases like, holy, insert adjective here, Batman, thanks for the gold, kind stranger, OP will surely deliver, I can't fap to this, for science, to the top with you, that escalated quickly, Will Ferrell right in the feels. Zip, directed by M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong, pure debauchery. As my high school guidance counselor once told me, you're not special. So, just to recap, cringe culture is the reaction to cringy things, and that reaction basically centers around making fun of cringy things, laughing at cringy things, or sharing cringy things in order to make others entertained by them as well. Cringe culture is at a larger level of reaction and more so community-based, while the singular term cringe is on an individual level and describes one's personal reaction to something they deem awkward or embarrassing. Cringe culture, as we know and hate it today, has been exacerbated by the internet. We have faster ways to communicate, a larger pool of people to make fun of compared to our limited communities, and easier access to things we consider social faux pas. Of the internet's impact on cringe culture, Alena Saucke says, the format is perfectly at home in an age of ever-increasing awareness of constant surveillance. Through camera phones, closed-circuit television, reality shows, social media et al., and brings with it the closely related idea of fame. The inevitability of observation brings a specific cultural self-consciousness of any state deviating from the ideal and builds a curious niche between the performances required of us in both work and private spheres, if we can separate them, end quote. Just to condense that a bit, Saucke is saying that cringe culture thrives on the internet, especially in our current age, which emphasizes around-the-clock surveillance. It has made us self-conscious of being perceived as different than the rest of our peers. Now, I want you to hold that thought for just a second. I asked on my Instagram what are some things that you, my audience, finds cringy. And you did not hold back. The responses range from the way people pose in photos, loud chewing, shippers of celebrities, TikTok dancers / TikTok dances, the 2000s era, fanfiction, pick-me's, trend followers, TERFs, white men, their old selves, PDA / over-the-top PDA, astrology, unironic emojis, gatekeeping certain songs, attention seekers, the CW, millennials, Minecraft, YouTuber stans, trauma dumping, quirky people, people who try too hard to be different, anime, mannerisms from TikTok, self-diagnosing. Someone said my mom. What did she do to you? Excessive cursing, university nicknames like Pimby or Wilmy, and comebacks that are trying too hard. Y'all must have the absolute worst time on the internet. Only a handful of people mentioned that it's cringe culture itself that makes them cringe, which I thought was interesting. Even more interesting are the the reasons people gave for finding these things cringy, a lot of the responses were rather flat in saying that it's cringy because it's cringy.
I have the mind of a I have the mind of a mastermind. What's that? I don't know, but I'm so creative like that.
Riveting. Other answers go more in depth by saying shipping is disrespectful / weird, CW scripts try too hard because they simply didn't like how they acted at a younger age, astrologists because they remind them of flat earthers and anti-vax moms. Okay. A few of the responses have just been that they're either a hater, have hate in their hearts, or there is no real logical answer. Gotta love honesty. But what do the experts say about the reasoning behind our cringe responses? According to Aditi Murthy, developmental psychologist Philip Rocat says cringe is an automatic empathy response of either contempt or compassion. An empathy response involves the necessity of experience. One cannot cringe without knowing what an embarrassing situation feels like. So if a person who understands embarrassment and social rejection finds one of the various humiliation-based videos and cringe compilations cringy, they are coming from a place of self-hatred or even self-awareness that they have done something of the like in the past and were socially rejected. By laughing, individuals reassure themselves that they would never tolerate themselves behaving in such a manner. Contemptuous cringe reactions, therefore, are a projection of insecurity. In short, their act of laughing at or condemning that sort of behavior is a way to reassure themselves that they will not act like that again, or that they are superior to the person who is acting like that now. Aditi Murthy also notes that contemptuous cringe can be found in political and identity-based discussions. Coming out as trans or rejecting the man-woman gender binary is strongly associated with social rejection. This makes people immediately want to mock non-binary individuals back into the gender binary. A deep discomfort with social rejection births contemptuous jokes like, "I sexually identify as an attack helicopter." Due to this, video essayist Natalie Wynn points out how contemptuous cringe is also a potent weapon for warring social and political ideologies. End quote. I thought it was interesting that the phrase social rejection kept popping up in my various sources, because at the very heart of cringe culture is the understanding that the reason people are laughing at others who commit social faux pas is because they are not ascribing to conventional things in society, or are not aligning with acceptable forms of expression, i.e., they are being socially rejected by the community because they do not fit the rigid standards of what's acceptable or not. Murthy goes on to say that, quote, "Neurologists and psychologists have posited that the pain of social rejection is similar to the pain of physical injury, yet more memorable than the latter. Evolutionary history has hammered in us a need for community, considering how lone prehistoric men died alone and survived in packs. Over time, this morphed into a rejection of those who did not adhere to arbitrary social mores, and the cringe is a symptom of anticipating that rejection. Later, a cringe reaction became the gut feeling equivalent of cultural arbitration. Why would anyone cringe at a good thing? Cringy things in culture automatically became bad and something one can laugh at." End quote. Humanity has evolved in such a way that being accepted by your peers is crucial to survival. We as humans need one another. We need to be seen, heard, and felt by others. We need to be reassured that we belong. Cringe culture both acknowledges that necessity and stomps on it with steel-toe boots. You can argue that there are some positive outcomes, such as teaching others that their harmful words or interests are wrong, but that opens a new conversation because it makes you wonder how much of the content on cringe compilations and subreddits are actually harmful. If we go back to my Instagram responses, only a couple of people mentioned cringing at things like racism or heteronormativity. The rest were things that are at face value, normal things that people do that just so happen to grind one's gears. Things like emoji use or TikTok dancers or the entire 2000th decade. I want to emphasize that it doesn't make you a bad person for finding these relatively harmless things cringy. I think it makes you human. I be kiki-keying on my Twitter with my best friend about silly tweets, and I can even admit that some of the TikToks on those cringe compilations made me chuckle, especially the furry ones, but I'm not I'm not judging. I think emotions deserve more nuance than separating them into good and bad categories, because sometimes things overlap. As Tiffany Watt-Smith said, Schadenfreude is a testament to our capacity for emotional flexibility, as opposed to moral rigidity, and our ability to hold apparently contradictory thoughts and feelings in mind simultaneously. Schadenfreude and sympathy are not either-or responses, as is sometimes suggested, but could be felt all at once. But, as with all emotions, condemning it only gets you so far. Which is true, but I'm an overachiever and a hypocrite. So I want to see just how far is only so far in terms of condemnation. I believe that there is a thin line between good-natured jokes about things that make us cringe and the level of disrespect that some of us tend to fall into when it comes to things that make us cringe. Just because we don't understand something or agree with something, we must cyber beat the difference out of others so they can understand their wrongdoings and be cool and palatable like us. It feels a lot like those 2000s movies with the cool and untouchable cliques who can do no wrong, and the awkward, spindly new character who comes along and proves to be utterly hopeless in the social world, which gets a lot of laughs and guffaws as everyone around the new character realizes how adorably lost they are. I think New University puts it best when they say, even in the most benign cases, cringe culture is a cheap laugh that requires a bit of punching down. Caleb Clark mentions that cringe culture can lead to harassment, cyberbullying, and a breach of privacy when low-profile people are dragged into the internet limelight without their consent. In terms of well-known figures, they're mocked incessantly online and become synonymous with whatever silly antic they've committed to spark a meme. Marie Kondo was made fun of online and on television for her organizing style and habit of thanking inanimate objects, which is a habit stemming from Shintoism, a traditional religion of Japan. It surprises no one that a bulk of the backlash came from Americans who don't understand that our customs and culture isn't the only one on the planet Earth, but y'all aren't ready to hear that. Cringe culture feels harmless to us because it's tapping into such a wholesome part of human nature, and that is joy. We see something awkward or cringy and we want to laugh and share it with our friends so they laugh too. That may cause viewers watching this to think I'm overreacting or reaching when everyone is just having good old harmless fun. But not all joy stems from ethical or even helpful sources. When cringe culture is utilized to make people feel ashamed of harmless interests like watching anime or being unironic in their love for Twilight, it makes people scared to be themselves. They see people getting picked on online, or they get picked on themselves, and they decide that they want to avoid that as much as possible. They begin to stifle self-expression and their interests in an attempt to be accepted by their peers because, as we noted earlier, social rejection leaves a lasting impression. It was sad to watch some of the TikTok compilations of people just doing their thing, having fun on the internet, and then to scroll down and see people talk about how brave those cringy people are for having that much confidence, or how much they pity them for making fools of themselves for the whole world to see, which again goes back to the idea of cringe culture stemming from personal insecurity and self-hatred. Because if you were confident in your own self, you would probably do a lot of the things you find cringy too. In fact, you probably did do those cringy things when you were younger or when you're alone in private. But you would rather make fun of other people and their interests because you're too scared to be like them. And what does that sound like to you? Let me tell you a little story. When I was growing up, everything I did was picked apart by my family and peers. Sometimes in relatively good fun, but other times it stemmed from malice. When I was constantly picked on for my voice, I learned to shut up. When my music taste was constantly made fun of, I learned to turn it off when others came in the room. When I was picked on for my hair being too short or too nappy or too this, I learned to cover it up. When I learned that my clothes were too old because I shopped thrifted and secondhand, I learned to just lie about where I brought my stuff. When any hobby or interest of mine came under critique, I learned to view it as something bad. I stopped hanging posters in my room as a teenager because that was called cringy. I stopped talking about things that made me happy because that's cringy too. Cringe culture taught me how to be small. And what is bullying if not forcing someone down into something minuscule, something barely there? As Aditi Murti puts it, what we cringe at plays a pivotal role in how we perceive the world. Developing a taste for cringe content and the contempt it inspires may often lead to one losing a sense of human error and kindness. When driven by performance, herd mentality, hatred for what's different, and a fear of mistakes, life essentially becomes a shell of what it could be. I agree with Tiffany Watt-Smith when she says we must look within ourselves and see what the schadenfreude phenomenon and, in relation to that, cringe culture means for us as individuals and our community at large. But I think insinuating that laughing at or shaming others for benign interests is a good, helpful thing is victim blaming. Because you're telling people who are dragged into the internet spotlight, who are called ableist slurs and told that they are cringy or weird, that they deserve it and that they should learn from this cyberbullying so they can never do that cringy thing ever again. Even if it's something as simple as using an emoji. You're not educating people to not do something bad. You're teaching them to be ashamed of themselves and hide parts of themselves from others. You're diluting the human experience to something so rigid that deviating from your idea of acceptability is met with a sadistic sense of humor. At the end of the day, I can't tell you what to make fun of or how to react when someone does something you deem cringy. If we're being honest, my best friend is probably going to keep sending me tweets with wild thoughts in them, and I'm probably going to keep hucking it up like my middle name is Goofy. But I think we should all take a moment to question what we're making fun of, and at the very least, question if those things are shameful in the first place. As Caleb Clark said, it would be the height of hypocrisy to look at cringe culture and say the group is irredeemable. They're people, perhaps searching for entertainment, perhaps searching for someone to pick on, perhaps a million other things. But they're people. Cringe culture and its end are not a be-all, end-all for a lack of human kindness, but it is a starting point for the online world. Remember to try to be kind and think of others as more than pixels on a screen.
You say